Hey folks, this is Takota Coen here, back for another episode of Building Your Permaculture Property podcast. And on today's episode, I have Neal Spackman. So Neal was part of our summit for our book that we just launched, and Rob and I only had like just over an hour to chat with him, and it wasn't enough time. So we wanted to get him back on the the podcast to kind of finish some stuff off.
There we go.
Neal, just to start off with, for folks who aren't familiar with you, could you just give a quick introduction to who you are, how you got into permaculture, and kind of what some of the projects you're working on next?
Sure. I got into sustainability in building environments and in food systems when I lived in Guatemala, which was between 1999 and 2001. Worked with a lot of people who were in quite destitute circumstances and were facing lots of issues related to those two topics. And that kind of set me on my path about caring about poverty and caring about sustainability. And I did a lot of reading on the subject, a lot of study, but I wasn't working in that field until I got an opportunity to go to Saudi Arabia and lead a project called the Albedo project, where I lived with tribes of settled Bedou and worked with hundreds of tribesmen in prototyping a way to restore their indigenous grazing systems through silvopasture. And so we were essentially converting areas of Saudi desert back into forest and then using that as a basis for grazing. And I was on that project for 9 years. That was really the first time I got into this kind of work professionally, or rather that was the transition, was going to Albedo. And I left Albedo middle of 2018 to do a business degree. And right out of business school, I started a company called Regenerative Resources. And we are focused on arid coastal landscapes. And we're kind of at the intersection of halophytic agriculture, which refers to crops grown in seawater, and regenerative agriculture, which I'm sure your audience is much more familiar with. And so we're kind of at the intersection of those, and that puts us in the forefront of what is a very undeveloped set of systems. The first real product we're rolling out, or the first system we're rolling out, is a mangrove agroforestry, where we are using effluent from aquacultures to grow mangrove forests, mangrove wetlands, and halophytic cropping systems. And that makes the aquacultures have zero pollution. Where aquacultures are an extremely dirty industry right now. But we're also developing our own aquaculture feeds off of these halophytic cropping systems. So we're making aquaculture circular and regenerative. And I think we're the first ones in the world to be doing it. There may be other folks out there, but I haven't found them making aquaculture circular and regenerative. You asked about current projects. We've got leads all over the planet, but the ones we're most focused on right now are a few in Mexico, one in West Africa that's not a done deal yet, but we're getting close to it being a deal. And then we hope to have one in the Middle East by the end of the year. And those three will keep us very occupied for the next 24, 36 months.
No kidding. Because you were saying like these are pretty large projects. They were several thousand acres, weren't they?
Yes. So in Mexico, we're doing a mangrove reforestation that's in a UNESCO biosphere and whale sanctuary. We're partnered with a number of fishing villages where their catch has decreased by 90% in the last decade, right?
Wow.
They're facing a tragedy of the commons.
Yeah.
All their kids are leaving
Oh.
because there's no future in the area. And so we're doing a reforestation on 8,000 hectares, which is about the size of Manhattan Island. Most of that's water. We're not planting all 8,000 hectares, but it's
Yeah. Yeah.
an area that big.
Yeah.
Uh, we estimate we'll do 12 million mangroves there over the next 4 years, hiring local fishermen to work in that.
Mhm.
And then at the same time, we're starting with a 500 hectare regenerative aquaculture system with those same fishing villages. So we're creating an alternative economy that's circular and regenerative, and working on the conservation side of things so that this area, we're really creating a healthier nursery for baby whales.
Yeah.
This is where Pacific gray whales come to calve every year. And it's a node point in the chain of ocean health, right? It's where you can have a massive bang for your buck there as opposed to somewhere else.
Yeah.
So we're doing both economy and ecology in that particular project. Um, the one in West Africa, we're looking at a 5,000 hectare phase one. Although we'd probably only develop 500 first, and then move up to 1,500 and then to 5,000. And by then we'll have, all the T's crossed and the I's dotted and all the kinks worked out of the system.
Yeah.
And this is in a place where there's 500,000 acres that we could deploy this system on.
Wow.
So that's what we'd like to do. We're looking at creating kind of regional nuclei around the globe from which this system can expand.
Yeah.
In partnership with local entities. In fact, the more local, the better. But the big ambitions, but we got to do the first things first.
Totally. Very cool. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about. I mean, you mentioned that you've always been kind of interested in poverty and helping basically develop communities and stuff like that, and that led you to working with the Albedo project. But
Yeah,
but then you went to business school.
that's
Why,
right.
why business school, Neal? I thought businessmen were heartless, greedy capitalists.
We sure are heartless, greedy capitalists. No, I think when I finished Albedo, I was trying to figure out what my next steps were, and my thought process was, how do I make the most difference in the world? With the 5 decades of productivity that I've got left.
Yeah.
And looking at all the options that were out there, I decided that the best vehicle for creating the most impact was a corporation. And our corporation does straddle nonprofit and for-profit objectives. In fact, we have a nonprofit financing mechanism, but I think it gives us the best chance to heal the earth, rather than to become a politician or an educator, or a strict nonprofit. I find that being a for-profit entity gives us the most leeway and the best chances at creating massive impact to heal the planet and bring people out of poverty.
Yeah. So are you comfortable kind of digging into that a little bit, because this is a very common um, kind of hang up that a lot of people in the permaculture space have, which is like, people who want to do good and help, but they go the kind of nonprofit
Yeah.
route. And so, like, was there like a turning point in your mind where you like, or any experiences that really kind of galvanized that business was kind of a missing piece of the puzzle?
I'm not sure that there was a certain experience as much as it dawned on me over time that the economic and the ecological are inextricably connected.
Yeah.
In Albedo, the biggest driver of deforestation was poverty,
Yeah.
right? And people couldn't feed their animals on their land anymore because of changes in policy. That was the underlying cause.
Yeah.
But the effect of that was that people had to cut down trees in order to buy imported fodder. So they're converting one kind of biological capital into another so that they can feed their animals.
Yeah.
Because their culture revolves around grazing, right? These are nomadic peoples. And so for me, it was the realization that the separation of ecology and economy is a false approach.
Yeah.
It's a wrong approach, and this is something that we've done as a species for hundreds of thousands of years. That we have two fundamental sets of issues that we face right now, but they're not new. It's just at a different scale, and it's with a different kind of saturation on the planet. And those issues are human issues, right? Ignorance, poverty, um, inequality, and prejudice and lack of education and unjust laws and unjust systems. All these things are human issues,
Yeah.
right? And then we've got an environmental set of issues that are very old. Deforestation, soil loss, water resources depletion, desertification. And today we can add ocean acidification, ocean dead zones, climate as the umbrella term for all of this stuff. Um, but none of these issues are new, except for maybe the ocean dead zones and the ocean acidification, right? Deforestation, desertification, soil loss, and water resource depletion are as old as agriculture. And I would also add biodiversity loss, but biodiversity loss isn't a new thing either. The first Americans drove the mammoth extinct. That's not a new thing. The only place where we didn't drive apex predators and megafauna extinct was in Africa, because in Africa, those species had enough time to adjust to humans being massive predators, right? But every other continent where people showed up, there wasn't enough time for those animals to adapt to our presence, and we drove them extinct as a species. So that, and so these are old issues. The problem is now they're happening everywhere, and we can't just pick up and go to somewhere else and start the process and let the place where we were before start healing. But we've got these two sets of issues, the human set and the environmental set, and we only ever address one by exacerbating the other, right? So if we want to if we want to build an economy, we do it by destroying ecologies, right? We mine soil, we mine minerals, we deforest, we desertify, right? You look at the American West right now with drought and water resources, it's terrifying,
Yeah.
right? But everyone's like, well, hey, I need my water, right? Who's going to give up their water first?
Yeah.
Nobody. Um, and so we're exacerbating the environmental issues by trying to address the human ones. And when we try to address the environmental issues, we exacerbate the human ones, right? We create this massive area and we say no person is allowed to utilize the resources in this area. It is forbidden, it's set aside for nature, right? And so this idea that we can only solve the environment by shutting people out and we can only help people by destroying the environment is not an explicit one. It's not a narrative, but it is a dominant practice, and it is an implicit set of assumptions that inform these things. And so what my business does is we combine ecology with economy. We explicitly say these things are deeply intertwined. And unless we approach them both together, there's never going to be a solution. Because just like poverty and ecological degradation are deeply, deeply connected, so are wealth and ecological well-being.
Yeah.
Right? There is no wealth without functioning ecologies. I don't care how many computers or zeros you have in your bank account. If you don't have clean air, clean water, a healthy ecology, greenery, right, and functioning ecosystems, there's no food, there's no water, there's no soil, and those zeros in your bank account don't mean anything, right? Because we can't eat money.
Yeah.
And so if we're addressing economic issues, that's a business, right? We have to create jobs that don't destroy the environment.
Yeah.
In fact, we can create jobs that heal the environment. And that's what we're doing. That's what our business is about at a very fundamental level.
Yeah.
And you can't do that as a nonprofit, not very well, because nonprofits tend to be poorly managed financially because they don't have to report on that bottom line.
Yeah.
Right? They don't have to do it. Right? But the other thing is that we're talking about trillion-dollar problems. And the total amount of philanthropy globally is in the tens of billions. Right? There's a single digit number of trillions of dollars sloshing around investment around the globe, right? And I think 11 or 12 billion in philanthropy every year.
Wow.
So is it better to try to solve $1 trillion problem with $12 billion of philanthropy when 2% of philanthropic money goes to environmental issues? Or is it better to harness the greed of the trillions of dollars of investment and say, we're going to solve problems with that much bigger set of ammunition?
Yeah.
Right? There's trillions in dry powder if we can attract investors into this versus billions of dry powder if we're going to do this as a nonprofit. Right? So the context of where we are now, the fact that multinational corporations in many senses are more powerful than national governments.
Yeah.
If we're going to solve this, it's going to be with businesses. Governments are not going to lead on this because they don't have the capacity to do it, especially democracies, right? Democracies are lagging institutions. You don't get policy change until you get the whole market to change first.
Yeah. Yeah. Democracy is basically mob rule.
Yeah. You got to get the mob on your side first.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I've and very well articulated. The other kind of aspect of this that because Rob and I have also kind of come to the same conclusion as well, in that and it was much to our kind of chagrin, and we were kicking our heels basically the whole way along as we were having these insights. It's like, yeah, like the best way to help people is through engaging their self-interest. And
yeah.
and so like have you ever read Atlas Shrugged or any of Ayn Rand's books or anything like
Not
that?
since high school.
No.
I read it in high school because I had to.
Yeah. and I mean, like it's. I know people. Whenever you say that name, people cringe because there's a lot of she had a lot of very interesting stances on things. But like I just finished reading basically all of her books again, and the one piece that I'm the most confident on in terms of like what she was trying to articulate was the fact that like our entire kind of cultural values and moral system is based on one of altruism, basically
Mm,
sacrifice of self for others and
yeah,
sacrifice of others for self.
yeah,
And when you were talking about this idea of like we either have to kill the environment to save people or we have to kill people to save the environment. And
yeah,
and, and like it's like that's the logical conclusion of an altruistic moral system. And so her radical uh, moral system that she kind of developed was that like self-interest and like basically the individual and the individual's right to his own kind of pursuit of happiness
mm,
was this kind of gold standard for morality and ethics. And now tied to that is like, well, if I have that right, then everybody, all other humans should have that right as well.
sure.
And her big failing was that she drew the line around humans, and it's like it was wrong for a human to do anything bad to another human, but anything goes once you got into the ecological realm.
Into everything else.
Yeah, I think that was just kind of her. You know, she wrote these books in like the 40s and 50s when there wasn't as much ecological understanding, but uh, like the key piece that we're also kind of working on some business projects right now, and like the one of the kind of you know the mission statements that we're working on right now is like it's like harnessing enlightened self-interest to restore the planet. It's
Sure.
like it's actually like creating a cultural shift around like going to businessmen. It's like, look, like you understand self-interest, like that's why you're in business. You understand that it's not wrong to make money, but you've got this narrow definition of what wealth is. And but like in a 5-minute conversation you can explain all the benefits of clean air, clean water, and all these different things. And then it's like, and so like if you truly believe in kind of self-interest, it's actually like this is the best investment. And I think it's just this uh, it's a total shift from going and like begging for handouts, via the kind of the nonprofit route. And then when the money dries up, the project dies. And I've
Yep.
just there's so many amazing people I've met over the years that have been working on these not-for-profit things, and they crash and burn as soon as the the 2%
Yep.
of the 1% dries up.
Well, it's a super common story.
Yeah,
I think the way that I talk about what you just said is when we talk about working with nature, that also includes human nature,
yeah,
right? And as much as there are massive cultural differences in the individualism versus collectivism
yeah,
spectrum, around the globe, I do think self-interest is a part of human nature. I think we're also inclined to cooperate as much as we are to compete.
sure. Like it's
We're also
in our
inclined towards
self-interest.
tribalism.
Yeah,
And so when we're talking about working with nature, if we throw human nature out of that, we're not going to succeed.
no, and this is another really kind of interesting what you call it, like a paradigm, I guess, that I've also become aware of is humans. So we have this framework that we call like the kind of the three paradigms through which people see the world, and one of them is the degenerative paradigm, which is humans are separate from the natural world and we're better than.
Yeah.
And then there's the sustainable world, or the sustainable paradigm, which is like the one that's kind of up and coming, which is humans are separate from the natural world and we're less than. So
Mm.
it's like, humans are a kind of a fallen species. We evolved from monkeys, or the alternative, it's like, we were given, basically divine sanction, and we're somehow special, or whatever. And then the third paradigm, which is, I think, is emerging in this kind of regenerative space right now is the regenerative paradigm, which is that humans just are, we're part of nature. We're not separate. We're not separate from it. We're part of the kind of the web of life,
Yeah.
and that it's in our own. So basically, it goes from like a pyramid where humans are at the top to a pyramid to humans where people are at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, you know, dogs and cats and then, you know, chickens and pigs are all, and then there's like a circle.
Yeah.
And then humans are like just, you know, one of the kind of nodes in the web of life. And
Part of that web.
yeah.
Well, and this gets to a question about identity, because the dominant narrative is that we're a virus,
Yeah.
right? We go
Yeah.
from place to place, we destroy it, and then we move on.
Yeah.
Which certainly has some historical basis to it.
Yeah.
At least since the advent of agriculture.
Yeah.
But, you know, there are numerous examples of people who have been a part of their ecology and maintain those ecologies for thousands of years. And those are indigenous peoples. That's not all indigenous peoples, but those are the indigenous peoples that, you know, successfully have cultures that are thousands of years old.
Yeah.
Right. And so I rely heavily on some indigenous thought for my foundational concept of who we're supposed to be as a species.
Yeah.
Right. And supposed to be is, right, we're not in the realm of science once we're talking about supposed to. Right. We're talking about how do we see ourselves. But I think the most, what we can conclude from the fact that there are people that have managed their ecologies and created successful cultures and societies around that integration. What that says to me is what we're supposed to be as a keystone species.
Yeah.
That the stewardship of the planet is what we're supposed to be taking charge of. Not because we're better, but because that's what our capacity is. You know, we've got massive capacity for destruction, as evidenced by the last 8,000 years of history, and probably going back further than that. But what indigenous societies teach us is that we've also got massive capacity to heal and to steward. And we've got, you know, as a species, both as individuals and as, you know, a collective, as a group of tribes and nations, we've got to decide pretty quickly that we're going to steward or not, right? And that choice has not been made explicit, right? Because it's beyond the purview of most of us, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny because like in the media, it's always presented as like there's the ecologist or there's the economist, and the
Yeah.
ecologist is saying like no we've got to kill people to save people, and like
Kind of.
and then there's the economist who's like no we have to keep going, we have to keep
We
burning.
need growth.
Yeah, we need growth, and it's this either or, just ridiculous, you know, like false dichotomy. And it's like there's a third option, which is like we can have our cake and eat it too in a situation. And but it's I've never seen it represented in apart from basically in like the permaculture or the regenerative agriculture space. It's
So
really strange.
the best framework I have for talking about this is Kate Raworth's donut economics.
Okay,
Are
yeah.
you familiar with that concept?
I've looked at it a couple of years ago, but I'm rusty on it.
It's worthwhile because she's an economist who said, look, GDP does not take into account the foundation on which everything rests. And she created the donut, which explicitly creates this relationship between human well-being and, you know, unspecified planetary boundaries. And she gets more granular than that, but it's the best framework that I've found for explaining the relationship between these two things,
Yeah.
right? Because and the way that, for your listeners, imagine a donut, and the outside of the donut represents, the planetary boundaries of production, right? And it's not just production, but it's also things like ozone and healthy oceans and, healthy ecologies. And then the inside of the donut represents, the donut hole represents all the people whose needs are not taken care of.
Yeah.
Right. So the idea is to get people out of the donut hole and onto the donut, um, without destroying that outside of the donut. Right. So the way I think about it is, we've been moving people onto the donut by shrinking it. Right. We are limiting the planet's boundaries to produce in the future by
Yeah.
destroying ecological processes.
Yeah.
And it's only permaculture and regenerative thought, and I would suggest indigenous thought as well, on which both of those things rely heavily.
Yeah.
That says, well, no, we can take care of people and expand the donut.
Yeah.
Right. We can grow the donut while moving people out of the hole.
Yeah.
And I think that's, to the extent that that concept is the concept of the donut is gaining traction. I know that the city of Amsterdam has just adopted it as their fundamental model of how they're going to think about how their city operates.
Interesting.
It's starting to gain traction within certain circles that are somewhat influential. And I think it's the best framework I've got for talking about this.
Yeah. So in terms of that donut, kind of being like there is some kind of an outer limit, or finiteness. If obviously there's renewable resources and stuff, but like, should you exceed certain things, there's a way to kind of break through that boundary, and there's problems there. But
Yeah.
one of the things, like, recently I've been really trying to kind of challenge my assumptions around, because like it's so easy to get in an echo chamber where you hold a certain belief, and you reinforce that belief by just listening to other people that just spout your own shit right back at you. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why I've gone back and listened to all of Ayn Rand's stuff again, is because it's like it's very very different. I'm reading books on like economy right now from Thomas Sowell, and one of the things that popped up for me was, are you familiar with Julian Simon, and his work on the ultimate resource? He was in a.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, so I haven't read his book, but I've seen a few of his talks, and he was like the antithesis of a guy named Paul Ehrlich.
Yeah. The population bomb was Paul Ehrlich.
Yeah, the population bomb. So he was at the same time, kind of, Paul Ehrlich was gaining traction. Julian Simon was his polar opposite, and his theory was that basically human ingenuity was the ultimate resource, and that they're like, no matter what happened in terms of like scare, based on basic economic principles, when one resource became scarce, say fish or whale oil or whatever, that the price would rise, and then that would switch to another resource, or it would spur people to
innovate.
Innovate to kind of solve the problem. So his theory was that basically the resources on planet Earth are infinite, and that all these kind of ecologists, they're just crying wolf and are playing Chicken Little, and there's nothing to worry about, and just all we need to do is focus on on economy, and this stuff will just work itself out. Sure. And like, I'm listening to some of these guys that have been saying this stuff since Ayn Rand basically said it in the the 40s and 50s, and Julian Simon said it in the 80s and 90s, and then like it's been this constant theme. But like, meanwhile, like I'm looking at, like, from this other kind of echo chamber, which is permaculture, and it's just like, ocean acidification, all these different things.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, there are certainly hard limits, and if we exceed those, like it's bad. And then we
Yep.
get into this downward spiral, like you said, where like the Bedouin and that you work with in Albedo, there's not grass for the animals, so they got to cut down trees, and then there's not trees anymore, and so they have to and it's just
Yeah.
the scarcity of that resource is driving not human kind of ingenuity, but it's just like a race to the bottom, basically.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, I think the reason that I'm not a doomer pessimist is because I think people are very creative.
Yeah.
And I think ingenuity and creativity is our,
Yes.
as a species, that's what makes us unique.
Yeah.
Right? There's not another species on the planet that's learned how to inhabit every single ecology, or at least every terrestrial ecology, right? We're not living under the
Maybe
ocean yet.
coyotes.
I mean, there are a few. I mean, certainly there are. I don't know if there are coyotes in like the Himalayas or in the upper mountain ranges, but anyway, certainly we are creative and
Yes.
ingenuitive,
Yeah.
right? In that case, he's very right.
Yeah.
We're going to figure out creative ways to integrate these ecological factors and environmental factors into our accounting. The problem is that our capacity to affect the earth is growing at a faster rate than our capacity to understand that effect.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that we fail to account for externalities or to consider them until a crisis hits, right? And so
Yeah.
I think he's half right.
I agree, and
Right? He's half right in the sense that we are creative, and that creativity will allow us to figure out ways to be stewards of the planet.
yeah.
But the idea that we don't have to worry about it, in my opinion, is a pretty garbage idea.
Totally. And maybe I'm kind of straw manning his point on that, but I do get the sense of from some of the stuff that I've read recently of like it's very much kind of poo-pooed in that kind of degenerative paradigm of just like don't worry about it. Like we're so smart, we'll just figure it out. All we need to do is just focus on the economy and it'll be fine. But like it's like these when I hear stuff like this, it's like these people are ignorant of history and ecology, like what's happening right now and what's happened in the past. Like there have been many civilizations that were quite advanced that collapsed utterly within a few decades as a result of destroying their ecosystems. There's a great book by Jared Diamond, Collapse.
Absolutely. I like have you read Dirt?
That was David Montgomery.
By Montgomery.
I've heard him talk, but I haven't read the book.
You ought to read the book.
Okay.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite books, actually. And he goes through
good.
China, the Indus civilizations, the Babylonian civilizations, America, early United States, the Mayans. I mean, every single continent has had a civilization go through this stuff because they destroyed their soil.
Yeah.
Right. And destroying their soil, sometimes that started with deforestation, right? And then that deforestation led to drought, and then that drought led to soil erosion. But it's not a new pattern.
No.
What's new about it now is that we're doing this everywhere.
Yeah.
Right? We're doing it everywhere. So one of the things that Montgomery talks about for the early United States was that before the narrative of westward expansion had anything to do with the idea that it was, a manifest destiny. 100 years before manifest destiny was even a phrase. Farmers in Virginia were completely depleting their soils in a decade through extensive
Yeah.
tobacco growth.
Yeah.
And they destroyed the soils, and then they went west where there was new soil to destroy.
Yeah.
Right? Westward expansion initially had nothing to do with manifest destiny. That was the justification people put on it 100 years later. What it was about was soil destruction, and George Washington wrote about it.
Yeah.
You know, like the idea that
That's
ecological destruction is a precursor to military expansion
yeah.
does not bode well for a planet where ecological destruction is happening everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a terrifying prequel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Well,
we're not the only primate species that fights over resources,
yeah.
and we're depleting resources everywhere.
Well, and that's, I mean, that really kind of gets back to this incentive piece is like our current economic structure, like it incentivizes, the fastest kind of growth and the ability to generate, dollars, but there's no line in the accounting system for, the for long-term wealth.
Yeah.
And I think that's there's not in kind of the global view of the world, but there's also not at the individual level. Is like I think a lot of people are just ignorant to, like, there's Wendell Berry has this idea that's like one of the most dangerous concepts in the human language is the concept of over there.
Yeah.
It's like that like the fact that we think that, oh, like there's a landfill, we'll just put the over there or it will go away. It's like there is no over there or away.
There's no away.
We're on spaceship Earth, and it's like all the shit that we're kind of kicking these cans down the road, like it's gonna come back to us, and it might not happen in our lifetime, but like at some point, your people that you love or their progeny are gonna have to deal with this shit. And it's like, so I don't I can't understand kind of the business side of the resistance to this problem, because it's such an easy case to make. But the piece that I'm actually most worried about, ironically now, because we've been having conversations with big money and big business, like they get this stuff, but the other side of the equation, which is that no, we need to protect ecosystems from ourselves. That's actually the kind of narrative that I'm most concerned with right now, because it's basically gotten to the point where, well, look at back at our history of how shitty we've been. Like look at Sapiens.
Yep.
I'm sure you've read that book.
Yep.
And it's like using that as justification for why humans are a virus, and we should just, Earth would be better off if we just went somewhere else or committed altruistic suicide as a species.
Yeah.
And like I honestly see that paradigm gaining ground right now. And it's really troubling.
Well, it's the dominant paradigm.
Yeah.
Right. That's why billionaires think we need to go to Mars.
Yeah.
That's why people think that the best we can do is be more efficient. Right. The best we can do is reduce our footprint.
Yeah.
Because the idea that we could actually be good doesn't even occur to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if I've told you this my kind of trump card for that argument, but I'm sure you've heard of the Paul Stamets presentation, like the sixth mass extinction, or the Science Advances article on that.
Yeah.
And so it's like basically there's pretty good evidence that we're in the sixth mass extinction. My favorite proof is like when I was a kid, I used to it was my job to like refill the windshield washer fluid whenever we went for like a summer trip. And it's like for the last 6 or 7 years, I have never bought like summertime windshield washer fluid because there's no insects.
The bugs aren't hitting your windshield anymore.
No insects anymore.
Yeah.
And so anyway, like
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident. Like there's a lot of doom and gloom and kind of the environmental reports and stuff like that that I don't pay a lot of heed to. But this is one that I do think that is accurate, is the biodiversity loss. But it's
Yeah.
like, so there's been, that statement is super positive for two reasons. One, it's like, well, we're in the sixth mass extinction, so there's been five other ones,
Yeah.
and we're still here.
Yeah.
And so it's like at least five times in the past, more than 50% of this, all species on planet Earth were wiped out, and it just keeps coming back. And every time it comes back, better and more diverse than it was before.
Oh, sure.
And
Right. That's not the question. Earth is going to be fine.
yeah,
The
exactly.
question is, are we going to choose to be the asteroid?
So and
Or
this
are we going to choose to live?
and so this is the second reason it's super positive, is that humans are just as powerful as asteroids and supervolcanoes and coronal mass ejections. It's like we are literally going up against the most powerful force in the universe, the force that makes something out of nothing, whether that's God or the Big Bang or whatever it is. There is something in the universe that, there's bare rock, and then you fast forward 1,000 years and there's a forest there. It's like it's a miracle. There's almost no other word for it. Like the miracle of life is just incredible. And so like we are literally fighting that force, and we're winning.
Yeah.
uh, but like we're going to be the victim of kind of our own, or the final victim of our own battle here. But it's like if we could harness that energy as opposed to fighting it and partnering with it, we can fast track that ecological succession. And there's oodles of examples of this stuff. But it's yeah, like there's nothing that, like, the only thing to be afraid of is basically our own paradigms. Like
Yep.
if we, and which comes back to the what's his name's there, Jared Diamond's book, Collapse. He goes
Hold
through.
on. I just lost your sound, and I
Oh,
don't know why.
oh, can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you. I accidentally hit a button. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. So Jared Diamond's book Collapse, he goes through kind of the five factors that lead to collapse, and he studies five different civilizations, and they sound very similar to the ones that Montgomery looked at. It was like the Anasazi, the Easter Islanders, the Greenland Norse, the Maya, and the Pitcairn Islanders. And basically, these five factors were.
Could you please repeat it?
Oh,
About
Siri's interrupting us. Yeah.
That's right.
These five factors were, it was like loss of friends, loss or gaining of an enemy, natural kind of environmental changes, so like ice ages, or some kind of
Natural
non-human
disasters.
yeah, natural disasters, kind of acts of God type stuff. But and then the final two were human caused environmental damage, and then the human response to that ecological damage. And so all the civilizations that he studied, they all shared a combination of these five factors, but every single one of them that he studied had two that they all shared, and that was human ecological destruction, and then the human response to that ecological destruction. Because he goes through civilizations that saw what they were doing, and they changed, like they had a healthy response to that ecological destruction, and they pulled themselves out of it. Japan was a really great example that he goes through in the book of how they were on the edge of basically wiping out all their forests on the island, but really good planning and long-term thinking has led to a really great sustainable agroforestry system on Japan. And so it's really interesting that like we are our own worst enemy in this in this situation.
Yep.
Which is again coming back to your insight of like focusing on kind of the, like you use the analogy of like a node, or like a kind of a lever that was really important to pull, which is business. It's like because if in order to get somebody to engage in a voluntary business, you have to get them to change their ideas, and then which in your case with your business model, you get them to change their ideas, to fix the environmental damage. So you're solving both of those five factors, the most common factors that cause collapse in a civilization.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep, we're the problem and we're the solution.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. So that's fascinating, man. I really I'm just enamored with the work that you've done, and so like we're at some point I'd love to have a private chat about some of the work that Rob and I are doing. We're not nearly as far along as kind of in our business development as you are, but we've also came to the same insight, and we're kind of coming at it a different angle, at least for right now. But I agree with you. This is kind of the last. This is the emergency brake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think getting this narrative out can do a lot of good.
Yeah.
And can help a lot of people move from paralysis to action.
Yeah.
I think people are more inspired by hope, or at least as inspired by hope as they are by fear. But I also think that when people don't have hope, they lose the faith to act.
Yeah. Well, and it's like there's really good positive psychology on this. What do they call it? Like when you're afraid, the part of your brain that gets activated is like the oldest kind of reptilian, the croc brain in the back of your head. And it's like it literally shuts down your ability to be creative. The only thing that could possibly save us, which is our kind of neocortex, like the creative part of our brain, the piece that makes novel connections between things that have never existed before. And so when we pump the doom and doom porn, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's paralyzing.
Yeah.
It's paralyzing. And I feel gratified that hundreds of thousands of people have watched my video, because I think that is one of the stories that is salient, because we are in such an extreme place.
Yeah.
In such extreme circumstances that it makes it salient that we were where we were. But I think there need to be a lot more stories out there. I appreciate the storytellers in our tribe.
Yeah.
Who are finding the other people doing this kind of work and telling their stories, because we tend to not tell them ourselves.
No. One of the are you familiar with Judith?
Judy Schwartz.
Yeah, Judy Schwartz. She featured you in her newest book, The Reindeer Chronicles.
Yeah.
And I just interviewed her on the podcast a month ago.
Oh, and great.
That like, I read the book before we set the podcast, because we met at a conference, and then I said, well, hey, you should come on the podcast and I'll talk about your new book. I haven't read it yet. And then I read it and I was like, holy, this is an incredible book. Like, just super inspiring of just like you said, looking at all these different examples, like the Lost Plateau and your Albedo project, and this guy who figured that he had the ability to like reverse desertification on an entire country just by planting trees. It was actually along the coastline, because it would reverse the weather patterns. Because he went back and looked at, it was actually it was old like religious texts, and found that like the winds used to blow from a different direction, and like that brought in the seasonal rains and stuff. And then he somehow figured out that when people cut down these trees, it reversed the winds and it blew all the moisture off the landscape. And it's just like there is so much stuff that we can do there's no fear at all in my mind, except for people and their crazy ideas. That's about the only thing that I'm concerned about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are you still connected with the Albedo project? Or have you been hearing about how it's doing? I know that
I talk with the Bedouin that I worked with regularly. I mean, we became very, very close.
Yeah.
I probably text a handful of families, every week or two.
Yeah.
But in terms of the organization for Albedo, we make contact once every 6 months. Every now and then, someone will write me an email and ask me a question and say, "Hey, why did you do this? And how should we proceed on
Yeah.
this thing?" That because they want to build on what I did and
Okay.
what we did.
Yeah.
But their focus right now is a big housing project. Housing's a real issue in Albedo, and so
Yeah.
I'm happy they're doing that. I understand that there are some barriers to implementing what we did ecologically on a large scale. I have been told that some of the large national projects and some of the large regional environmental projects have adopted the methodology we developed in Albedo.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's officially the case. I haven't been told by officials that that's the case. I've been told by people on the ground
Yeah.
that these people are doing Albedo um, on a large scale. So I know that it's made a difference. I know that it's gotten. I know that a number of policymakers over there have seen my video at least, and a number of members of the royal family, and that it's given them an idea of what's possible.
Yeah.
And I know that the monarchy announced massive reforestation projects,
Oh, wow.
including mangroves on their coastline. So I don't know how much of that, if any, I can take credit for, or we can take credit for rather.
Yeah.
But I know that our site is still alive. I know that the ecology is still developing. And I know that many people have been inspired by it. So I find that very gratifying. I think the best thing that I took away from that was my experience.
Yeah.
I'm a totally different person than I was 12 years ago
Yeah.
because of what I went through over there. And I think by and large, a better one. I hope so. So whatever the fallout of that project is, um, it's definitely set me on the path I'm on now.
Yeah.
And I'm on a path to grow millions of acres of forest.
Yeah.
So, and not alone, clearly, but I think I can lead our organization to be
Yeah.
a vehicle for that.
So on that note, Neal, the last time we spoke, which was back in April, you you were like just kind of launching Regenerative Resources, and you mentioned the some of the different kind of investments or funding opportunities that were going to be available.
Yeah.
Is that operational? Where can people go to find out more about the work that you're doing, or if they want to
So our current site is regenerativeresources.co.
Okay.
We are about to launch a philanthropic raise for a reforestation project. We're going to try to raise $12 million to grow 12 million mangroves. And then in terms of investment, we're probably that people in general can participate in, or firms or whatever it may be. I think we're still 3 months away. We're about to sign a right to purchase on a 5,000 acre site in Mexico. And then we're going to have to finance that project, which will be a mix of carbon-based revenues and revenue-based investment. So we're treating it like an infrastructure project.
Yeah.
Where investors get a payout off of the revenues rather than an equity-based one is how we want to do it.
Okay. Interesting. No, that's fantastic. So I will put the link to that in the show notes below. And at whatever time you're hearing this podcast in the future, folks, I'm sure there'll just be an increasing number of ways that you can get involved in the project.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we are going to crowdfund some of this, where if people want to, chip in $10 a month, we'll grow 10 mangroves for every dollar we get, but also you'll be able to track the growth of that forest more or less in real time, as well as track the environmental and economic impact of what your money is doing. One thing that I'm excited to trial is on our financial books, we're not just going to track financial capital. We're going to show how financial capital is generating more financial capital and biological and ecological capital at the same time. I actually want to have like biodiversity on our financial books and come up with metrics to track it.
Okay,
so that we're gonna pave the way to start changing accounting so that in some ways we'll come up with one method, and hopefully 1,000 other firms do something similar, and we'll come up with a way to start tracking all the stuff that we affect.
Totally. So that's kind of a great segue into the conversation that I would love to have with you at some point in the future, because that's the piece, the nut that we're trying to crack right now is how, like, is there a way that we can objectively measure regeneration so that you can reliably communicate that value to other people and show, so that these ecosystem services can be sold as a service, because that's what they are. But unless we can find a way to objectively measure those metrics, it's super difficult. And so, I mean, I'm curious, like, have you, what are some of the key kind of metrics that you guys are looking at right now, or have you gotten into that stage?
We're developing a partnership with an entity that uses low orbit satellite data to track ecological change. That'll be one way to do it.
Yeah.
We're also working with a group that they have this filter that you can put in the ocean that collects floating DNA.
Oh yeah.
And you can track, when we start, we can track what are all the species present in the ocean, and then we can measure that into the years after we regrow all these mangrove forests, and we can start to track what's coming back.
Yeah. So it's like a PLFA test, which measures the DNA in like soil health, but it's for the ocean. Interesting.
Yep. You can also do, there's another group we're in discussion with. My computer's about to die. I need to move and plug this in real quick. There's another group that does, they do AI. They teach AI to recognize bird song. So you can do audio recordings, just constant audio recordings in different areas in the forest you're growing. And the computer, through the AI and recording a bird song, will tell you the density and the number of different species of birds you've got.
Yeah.
So we're going to be able to track the increase in biodiversity in the water and in the air as our projects are implemented.
Yeah.
And at the same time, use low orbit satellite data to track things like biomass.
Yeah.
And then you can triage those 3 different data sets to create a really interesting picture of what's going on ecologically.
Yeah.
And so, we're going to use high-tech stuff to create new indigenous systems.
Yeah.
But we're also going to be tracking these metrics and putting them on our books. So when we go to, an investor and they're like, hey, I'm only getting, 5% returns on this investment, I can say, well, that's only if you're measuring your financial capital. Here's how many millions of animals you've created a home for.
Yeah.
Here's how much carbon you've sequestered. Here's how much fresh water you've created. here's how much rainfall you've generated with your investment.
Yeah.
And I think for the right kind of investor, that's not just sexy, that's mind-blowingly amazing.
Totally.
And we're gonna do it.
Totally. So the reason I'm grinning like an idiot is because this is exactly what those are the same conclusions that we've came to as well. Is satellites, some kind of AI technology that can measure the sounds of biodiversity, and ideally some kind of soil health test that measures the bottom. This is for land-based systems, but I'd never thought of, like, we haven't gotten to the point where we're looking at, well, what about other kind of aquatic systems? But it's like it's the same. You can use the same metrics.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'll just give a bit of a teaser, and then maybe we can chat offline. But like, so the company that we've just created just in the last like 2 weeks here, and we're in the process of getting everything funded and starting to do our research and stuff, is we're looking at so you're familiar with cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin or Ethereum or things like that.
Sure.
Where the way that those economic systems work essentially is there are, for Bitcoin, like, there are math problems that computers compete to solve that add another block to the chain, which is the way that they encode information in a way that is trustworthy and all this stuff. And so the guys that we're working with are basically one of the top companies in the crypto space right now, and we've been doing some consulting with them on their private properties, doing regeneration work. And we kind of developed this idea of, what if there was a way that as opposed to paying a computer for solving a math problem, what if we could pay a land steward for solving a restoration problem? So and so this has led to the same thing. It's like, okay, but in order to do that, we need to objectively measure. Like, you can objectively measure when a math problem is solved, because all the other computers can verify, yep, that's how you solve that problem.
Yeah.
So if we can come up with an objective way to say, yep, this species wasn't here before, there's more biomass than there was before, there's more biodiversity in the soil or the water life in terms of the DNA, or if it's the leaf area index, or the like the photosynthetic capacity of the plant, whatever it is, or carbon, but if you can do it in an objective way, now we can actually create a cryptocurrency that literally every time a farmer restores land, a token is given to that farmer. And in addition to all the kind of classical economic models that, like, where he can sell his products, and like there's enough of a benefit for a farmer to kind of regenerate land as is, in terms of his own enlightened self-interest. But the barrier that we're trying to overcome is, it's so freaking expensive. Like, there's been 200 years or more, well, basically in some cases 10,000 years of mining this ecological capital, and we've basically got like a generation to restore it. I'm like, I don't know if kind of our classical economic systems are just paying for regular goods and services. The things that people would see as goods and services, like food and shelter and stuff like that. I don't know if there's enough of an incentive that we could get farmers to do and land managers to do all the regeneration work without some other way of objectively measuring the ecological goods and services that are created. So yeah, I'm curious to kind of hear your thoughts about that particular system. And
it gets convoluted really fast, right? Because anecdotally, farmers who are managing their land regeneratively are more profitable.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So you'd think that in and of itself ought to be enough incentive. And I think there are, I mean, certainly with things like cover crops and no-till, there are a lot more farmers and farming in the conventional sense that are adopting these practices that, are reducing their inputs and increasing their resilience. But when we're talking about, outside of the US and Canada framework, which is where the vast majority of my work is taking place.
Yeah.
We're going into places where the crisis is there, or the opportunity is just so immense because it's way too obvious.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm in places where fishing villages have seen their catch decrease by 90%, right? And they're facing hard times.
Yeah.
And when people are facing hard times, they start to look for alternative systems to try to get out of the hard times.
Yeah.
Or we're in places where, take for instance, the Middle East. Right now, there's massive dairies in the Middle East that source their feed from California and Arizona. Yeah. Right? They're growing alfalfa in California and Arizona, baling it and shipping it to Riyadh.
Yeah.
Right? And alfalfa consumes between 4.5 and 5.5 million acre feet of water in California every year. Yeah. That's the equivalent of 1/3 of the entire Colorado.
Holy shit.
For alfalfa, one crop going to animal fodder and dairies.
Yeah.
Right. Eventually, people in California and Arizona are gonna say, "This is nuts, and we're not doing it anymore," because they are facing huge amounts of pain.
Yeah.
Over the loss of water and drought. One of the things we're developing is fodder crops that don't use any fresh water at all.
Yeah.
So we could go to the Emirates or to Oman, or to the Red Sea region and say, "Hey, you don't have to import any of your fodder anymore. We can grow all of it with seawater." Right? And that changes their metrics on food security and, and economy as well, right? Because they're not importing all of it. But it also has the potential to fundamentally change, the virtual water paradigm, right? Because if they don't need to grow the alfalfa in California, then all of a sudden that water's going somewhere else, So I think where I tend to work, it's where the crisis is imminent.
Yeah.
Because that's where people are looking for change. If someone's fat and happy, they don't see the incentive to change what they're doing. Yeah. Right. But beyond that, beyond like the individual incentives, policy plays such a huge role in creating incentives, and incentives drive behavior.
Yeah.
And then you have market forces at play. I know there's all sorts of monopolistic factors when it comes to our food systems. So it gets convoluted very, very quickly. But the fundamental line is, we can mortgage our ability in the future to grow food, or we can start growing food sustainably now.
Yeah.
And there will always be early adopters, and then there are storytellers who tell the story. And then there are people who say, "Oh, well, maybe that is better. I'm going to give it a shot." And then they give it a shot. And then it starts, if it's the right thing, it starts to snowball, right? Because people will see that it's the right thing. They'll see that they're better off. They'll see that their land is better. They'll feel better about it. And then you adopt it, right? So it's this long process of societal change. being driven by the pioneers and the storytellers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like, paraphrasing, I don't know who said it, but it's like, first they laugh, then they ridicule, then they fight, then you win.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And I don't know what stage we're in. I think it depends on where we're talking about.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of work to be done. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and so that was the kind of lever that we're trying to pull is through the creating incentives, because I have lost all faith in our governments. I've never been so pessimistic about the political scene than I have in the last 12 months, and so it's like, no one's going to save us, at least from that space is and so if we can
Gotta
come
be
up,
us.
pardon? Yeah, it's
Gotta be us.
we're the ones we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
So Neal, it's speaking of dairy animals, I got to go milk my cows.
Good.
So it was an absolute pleasure to talk with you again, and I would love to connect again real soon. And again, for folks who want to learn more about Neal Spackman's work, they can go to regenerativeresources.co. There'll be a show note a link to in the show notes below. Any parting words, Neal?
I think we've said a lot.
Yeah.
I think we've said a lot. Just that I find a lot of joy in doing work that I believe in.
Yeah.
And I know that the solutions we're creating are real. And that, we need more people.
Yeah.
We need more people. We need more of this human ingenuity dedicated to creating regenerative systems, rather than trying to create the next piece of technology that's going to generate the next problem. And the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned.
Totally. Yeah, it's all hands on deck, but it's a fun ship. We're having lots of fun.
That's right. Anyhow, I appreciate the opportunity, Takota, and appreciate the work that you and Rob are doing, and Michelle as well. And we just got to keep going.
Hey, I just had an idea, Neal. I live right next to an alkali lake, and so if you ever need to expand your saltwater regeneration projects, you're welcome to move in next door to me. And
there's Salicornia that'll grow up there.
Okay.
There cool. is. You could source it from a friend of mine in Scotland.
Yeah.
There's stuff you can do with it.
Cool. Super exciting, man. I cannot wait to see your next developments of this project and see where it goes.
I appreciate it. I'll let you know, because we're going to need all the help we can get.
Awesome. Okay, brother.
Talk to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.